Silence. Heat. People speak of Kentucky as horses and bourbon, green hills and front porches. But there are corners of this state where the map still holds names for towns that no longer stand. Not because of war, not because of fire, but because something quieter unfolded. Coal ran dry, rivers shifted, companies purchased whole communities and cleared them away. Houses vanished, churches followed. What does it mean when a town disappears on purpose? Let's walk slowly. Scuffletown, Jefferson County. We begin gently. Scuffletown was never a booming industrial hub or a county seat. It was a rural crossroads settlement dating back to the early 1800s, positioned on the edge of what would eventually become Louisville's westward expansion. It had homes, farmland, and a name that appeared on early maps. Not because of ghosts, but because of growth. As Louisville expanded through the 19th and 20th centuries, farmland became subdivisions. Roads were renamed, property lines redrawn, highways and shopping centers replaced fence lines and fields. Development did not attack Scuffletown, it absorbed it. There was no dramatic collapse, no abandoned main street, no courthouse left to decay, just gradual erasure by design. Municipal boundaries shifted outward. Zoning changed. What was once a distinct rural community became a neighborhood, then simply part of the city grid. Over time, even the name faded from everyday use. Then the unsettling part is how clean it was. Scuffletown did not experience economic ruin or natural disaster. It did not empty. It blended. Barthell, McCreary County. Further south, in the wooded terrain of McCreary County, Barthell emerged in 1902 as a coal company town. It was carefully structured. Rows of worker houses stood in order. Wages were often paid in scrip, usable at the company store. Rent was deducted directly from earnings, not because of hauntings, but because of dependency. Like many early 20th century coal camps, Barthell's existence was tied entirely to a single employer. So the company provided housing, employment, supplies, and infrastructure. That structure created stability, but also vulnerability. When coal production declined mid-century, operations reduced, jobs evaporated, families left in search of work elsewhere. Without the company's support, the town's framework dissolved. Unlike many ghost towns, Barthell did not entirely vanish. Portions have been restored as a historic site. Visitors can walk through reconstructed homes and buildings, see the layout, and understand the design. You can stand on a porch that resembles the original, look into rooms staged to reflect past life. But restoration does not erase dependency. Nearly every paycheck, every meal, every roof was tied to one company. When that company withdrew, so did the town's purpose. Blue Heron, McCreary County. Not far from Barthell lies Blue Heron, a mining community abandoned in 1962 after coal operations ceased. At its height, Blue Heron supported families who relied on steady shifts and predictable routines. When mining ended, relocation followed, not because of tragedy, but because industry moved on. What makes Blue Heron distinct is its reconstruction. Located within the Big South Fork National River and Recreation Area, the site now features interpretive structures marking where homes and facilities once stood. Some buildings have been recreated in skeletal form, allowing visitors to walk through outlines of former kitchens and living rooms. There is something unusual about a reconstructed ghost town. You can stand where a kitchen once stood. Look through window frames that are not original. The layout is visible. The life is not. In preservation here is educational, controlled, deliberate. It provides context without decay. But the real houses are gone. The original walls were removed or collapsed decades ago. Rock House, Pike County. In the Appalachian Hills of Pike County, Rock House once supported miners and their families through mid-20th century coal production. The town's rhythm followed the mine schedule. Shifts determined sleep, meals, and school hours. Coal decline in the mid-1900s changed that rhythm, not because of sudden disaster, but because the seams thinned and automation increased efficiency. Eastern Kentucky lost tens of thousands of coal jobs between the 1950s and early 2000s. As operations consolidated or closed, small communities like Rockhouse felt the contraction first. Families relocated to larger towns or out of state entirely. Local businesses dependent on minor wages closed as customers disappeared. Today, rusting equipment remains scattered in the hills. Concrete foundations sit half swallowed by trees. Roads are less traveled. Structures that remain lean into the slope. The Rockhouse did not collapse overnight. It thinned. And when industry contracts, towns do not always survive the contraction. Rockhouse did not.
Zebulon, Pike County. In the rugged hills of Pike County once stood Zebulon, a small coal town shaped by nearby mines. Work began before sunrise, and coal trains carried the day's labor through narrow valleys to distant markets. For decades, the system worked, not because of permanence, but because the mines still produced. Zebulon was never large, but it had the essentials of a working community. Houses lined the valley floor. A small school served local families, and stores survived on minor wages and railroad traffic. Then the system began to weaken. Mechanization reduced the need for labor. Mining companies consolidated operations, and rail routes declined as trucking replaced older transport. Employment shrank. Families left for work in Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan, following a familiar Appalachian migration. The change was gradual. One house emptied, then another. Businesses closed, and Zebulon slowly thinned until only its name remained on maps and memory.
So Fillmore, Bell County. Fillmore stood in Bell County as one of many coal-dependent settlements shaped by a single industry. For decades, mining structured daily life. Shifts began before dawn. Wages circulated through small local businesses. Churches and schools filled predictably. After World War II, demand patterns shifted. Mechanization increased output while reducing labor. Trucks replaced rail in some corridors. Larger operations consolidated production. Smaller communities like Fillmore felt the contraction first, not because of panic, but because the economy modernized. The decline was gradual. No riot. No blaze, no sudden catastrophe recorded in headlines, just incremental departures. A family leaving for work in Ohio, another moving south for manufacturing jobs. Houses sold, then left vacant when buyers never came. A porch light left on. A door never opened again. By the 1960s and 70s, many Appalachian counties saw sustained population loss. In some eastern Kentucky counties, population declined by double digits across decades as coal employment dropped from tens of thousands to a fraction of its former numbers. Fillmore thinned quietly. Services closed as enrollment fell. Small stores shuttered when customer bases evaporated. Infrastructure aged without replacement. The unsettling detail is not destruction, but continuity fading. Children left and did not return. Classrooms shrank, congregations aged. Lawton, along the Mississippi River. Lawton once existed near the Mississippi River, its early economy tied to river trade in the 19th century. River settlements relied on predictable channels, accessible docks, and steady transport routes linking farms and markets. And then the river shifted, not because of curse, but because water moves. The Mississippi has altered its course repeatedly over centuries. Sediment builds, banks erode, floodplains reshape themselves. What was once prime access to trade can become stranded land within a generation. River towns depend on location. When the river repositions, trade patterns change. When channels narrow or widen, docks become unusable. When flooding intensifies, rebuilding becomes impractical. Flood events along the Mississippi in the 19th and early 20th centuries displaced numerous small settlements. Some rebuilt, others dwindled as commerce rerouted toward more stable ports. Lawton gradually lost its reason to exist, not in a single disaster, but through erosion of relevance. Businesses closed as river traffic declined. Families relocated to towns with rail access or more reliable trade networks. Over time, little remained to distinguish the site from surrounding land. Some ghost towns are taken by corporations, others are taken by geography, and geography can be indifferent. Water does not negotiate. It does not compensate. It simply reshapes. Good Pastor, Harlan County. In the narrow valleys of Harlan County once stood Good Pastor, a small mining settlement tied completely to the coal seams beneath the mountains. The town formed in the early 20th century as companies opened mines across the region, bringing workers, families, and the promise of steady wages. For a time, the system held, not because it was secure, but because coal still powered the economy. Rows of modest houses filled the valley. A school served miners' children. Local stores depended on paydays from the nearby operations. Then the industry shifted. Mechanization reduced labor needs. Some mines closed entirely. Others consolidated under larger operations farther away. Jobs disappeared. Families moved north and west searching for work. Houses emptied. Businesses followed. Good Pastor didn't vanish in a disaster. It simply faded, slowly losing the people who once gave the valley its life. See Airdrie, Muhlenberg County. Airdrie was founded in 1857, deep in Muhlenberg County, at a time when Western Kentucky coal and iron promised permanence. Investors carved roads into the woods, built coke ovens from brick, and raised company housing for workers who believed the industry would outlive them. For a few decades, it did. Coal seams were extracted. Iron was processed. Wages circulated through the company store. The town had structure, rhythm, expectation. But coal is finite. And by the early 20th century, production declined. Transportation patterns shifted. Investment moved elsewhere. Without sustained demand, Airdrie thinned. Families relocated to more stable mines. Buildings were left behind, not because of ghosts, but because the coal played out. Today, the most visible remnants are the coke ovens, thick brick cylinders still standing among trees that have grown around them. The forest has folded back over the grid of the town. Foundations sit beneath leaves. Paths once worn by boots are barely traceable. Clay City's forgotten industrial camp, Powell County. Near Clay City in Powell County, early 20th century logging and industrial camps once operated along rail spurs cut into dense forest. These were not permanent towns in the traditional sense. They were built quickly, aligned with production schedules, and tied entirely to extraction. When timber thinned and contracts expired, the camps no longer justified their existence. Workers packed belongings. Rail lines were removed or repurposed. Equipment was relocated to the next site. But records indicate that some camps were dismantled deliberately, structures taken down, lumber reused, materials hauled away. Not because of disaster, but because the project ended. Temporary towns carry a different kind of unease. And they are constructed with departure already built into the blueprint. Housing was often uniform and minimal. Schools, if present, were small and provisional. Everything depended on the lifespan of the resource. Families still lived there. Children were born there. Meals were cooked, holidays observed. And yet the community was designed to vanish. Paradise, Muhlenberg County. Paradise was not a struggling coal camp. It was a functioning town in Muhlenberg County with homes, businesses, a school, and a church. Families expected continuity. Children grew up assuming they would remain. Then the coal company expanded. In the 1960s and 1970s, Peabody Coal Company began purchasing properties to expand strip mining operations. Offers were made, houses were bought. Gradually, ownership consolidated. Homes were demolished, buildings removed, residents relocated, not because of neglect, but because removal was more profitable than coexistence. Unlike towns that faded slowly when mines closed, Paradise was methodically erased. Streets were cleared, structures dismantled. The land was reshaped for extraction. John Prine would later memorialize the town in song, preserving its name in cultural memory. Without that reference, Paradise might have slipped quietly from public awareness. The unsettling part is the completeness. Paradise did not decay. It was erased by design. If you stand where it once stood, you do not see abandoned storefronts or collapsing porches. And you see altered landscape, mining scars, and open ground where a community once stood. Silence returns. Kentucky's ghost towns are not dramatic. They are not theatrical. They are the result of industry, water, rail, economics, and decisions made far from front porches. Some faded slowly, some were dismantled, one was purchased and removed. The map still remembers their names, but the land does not, and that might be the quietest part of all.